Leadership is often measured by decisions. But what if the hardest part isn't making the decision? What if it's living with it afterward? Some decisions are visible to everyone. Others happen quietly, behind closed doors, in moments of uncertainty, responsibility, and consequence. Long after the meeting ends or the announcement is made, leaders are often still carrying the emotional weight of what happened next. Today, we're exploring the decisions no one sees and the personal cost of carrying responsibility. Welcome to Deals with Heels. I'm Debra, your host. This is where we go beyond the surface of business, leadership, and sales conversations and into the real decisions that shape how we grow. Today, I'm joined by Carol Enneking. Carol is an author, a speaker, and a leadership advocate whose work focuses on helping people redefine success, create sustainable growth, and build lives that align with their values. Throughout her leadership journey, she has explored the tension between ambition, identity, responsibility, and well-being, especially in moments when the path forward isn't obvious. Her work invites a more honest conversation about leadership, one that acknowledges not only the decisions leaders make, but the emotional weight they carry through implementation and beyond. Carol, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I'm excited to have this conversation. We talk a lot about decision making and emotional regulation and how our decisions affect everyone and making them. And we don't always think about how a leader really struggles with making decisions that are difficult long after, right? Because they don't want to talk about it either. The decision's made, let's move on. And so I'm really excited to get into that with you. So tell us a little bit about how you got started and ended up where you are right now.
Well, it's a long story, so I'll give you the short version, but my career has taken a lot of twists and turns. I started with a marketing degree, started working for a major energy company, and thought I'd be there forever, but ended up deciding to pursue my passion, which at the time was learning and development. So I ended up leaving that company where I thought I'd stay. I went to another company where I learned a lot about how to teach other people, adults. It's different than teaching kids, and got a lot of certifications. And I really wanted to focus on leadership development. Having been a manager of frontline employees myself, I was passionate about that. Over the years, I ended up being an entrepreneur for 18 years after that, and focused a lot on leadership development, a lot of management training, went all over the world with that. And then, as always was the case, a lot of times my personal situation would dictate my career choices and the decisions that I made.
Everybody raises their hand.
Yes,
oh, yes.
yes.
Especially when you have kids. I raised 5 kids. There were so many decisions that were based on the quickest way to revenue.
Yes.
And that didn't have anything to do with Debra's passions or what she might want to do with her life.
No, it was chase a paycheck. And I found that I could have my own gig work before that was even a thing when my kids were little. And it allowed me the flexibility to work my tail off, but be there for all their programs. And lots of juggling ensued. But then I had a bit of a surprise in my personal life. I ended up getting a divorce after 22 years and was a single mom. College was looming for my 2 kids. And so I decided to go back into corporate after being on my own for 18 years. And that was quite a transition. And I guess I wanted to prove to myself that I could still make it internally in an organization. And I did. And I rose to an executive level, stayed there about 7 years. I learned so much going back on the inside to be a leader and live every day with all the principles I'd been teaching other people for decades. So that was a great learning and growth experience for me. And the reason I ended up leaving that job about 3 years ago was once again a personal decision. And I was at a very different point in my life by that time. My kids had gone through college and thankfully had made it out and were adulting. And I had gone through breast cancer. I had also found love again. I have an amazing second marriage. Love is great the second time around. But my body was starting to give me signals that I just could not continue to work the way I had. And the problem was I was a workaholic. And so I would give everything 110% effort at my own expense all the time. And I started having some health issues as a result, which is probably not surprising to anyone. But it took my body basically screaming at me for me to finally tell my boss one day. I said, I think my body is just telling me I cannot continue to work like this. And so over the next few months, we found a way for me to exit gracefully with a severance. And that's a lovely way to go and afforded me some time to think about what was next. And what I really wanted to do was write a book. So I did that. I interviewed over 70 women and men. And I started looking at all the balancing acts that people try to manage when they're trying to be it all and do it all and have it all, and what traps you can fall into. And, I've been in a lot of those traps myself, but I found in all these interviews, I wasn't alone. And a lot of themes emerged. It was the basis for my book. And now it's the basis for me pursuing my passion, which is public speaking. So I'm out there spreading this message, and I'm on a mission to help people redefine success before it redefines them.
Wow, that is fantastic. It's such a similar journey to how a lot of women, we raise kids, we do all the things, and then sometimes feel a crash. And I love specifically how your body started giving you those signals. And it's showed up for me also. Gosh, it's been 5 years, I guess. 6 years. 2020 was hard for me. I think like it was a lot of people.
Yeah.
And my final kid graduated high school and left the nest.
Yep.
And that, of course, left some empty space, even though it was good, still empty space. And my marriage fell apart of 20 years. And then in 2021, my mother died. And I took care of her. She was a cancer survivor. And during her 5-year journey, I was her caregiver. And she lived with me about 2 years during that time, and then off and on after that. And, grief was really hard for me. I was incredibly thin, like 30 pounds lighter than I am today, and frail. I felt unhealthy and I felt weak. And I had always been an athlete. So for me, that was not a normal way to feel. And I would go on my temp job because I also didn't know I was running a business that I shared with my husband, and I'd walked away from that. And so I didn't really have what am I going to do with my life when I grow up kind of thing, and was really frozen. And the first steps that I took were about being healthy. One, because I was really starting over. My ex had a gambling problem, so I was starting over really with nothing. And in my 50s, I had a lot of ground to make up, and feeling it like it was really insurmountable. I mean, what do you, it's an overwhelming feeling, but in the midst of it, I was just overrun with grief. And through grief counseling and all of the things, I found my way through. And not to tell my story, but that physical aspect and understanding that my physical body has to be able to hold what comes next.
That's right.
And it has to make room for it. Well, there was plenty of room. Full of a big empty space. There was lots of room to fill it up, but I had to be able to hold on to those blessings. And so the first non-negotiable boundaries I made with myself, I'm not eating any fast food. I was picking up fast food on the way home and sitting on my bed and eating it and watching TV, and lived in a big house by myself and spent most of the time in that one room.
Yeah.
So that was the other one. I'm not eating in my bedroom ever again. I'm going to be out here. I cook. I love to cook. So why am I not doing it? And I think making those small, healthy choices, even if they're small, you don't have to give up fast food, but make a healthy choice. So a signal to yourself and to the universe and to God that I am ready to do it.
Yeah.
and preparing my vessel for all of my blessings, so to speak. So I really identified with when you said my body was sending signals to me. Mine
Yes.
probably had been for a while, and I didn't notice the signal until tragedy thrust me there. And the only path forward was to feel better physically.
Yeah.
Do you see that a lot with leaders?
Yes. And especially female leaders. And so, what's interesting is that a lot of us spend so much of our lives doing things for other people that we put ourselves last. That's probably not new news to any of your listeners, but it's unfortunate that despite us knowing that this happens, we still don't always do anything to change that cycle. And so what ends up happening is you have this cycle that leaves you feeling burned out and exhausted, giving everything to your job, your spouse, your kids, your everything, caregiving, whatever it may look like, but you aren't necessarily taking good care of yourself. And that was me. And all of a sudden it was like I blinked my eyes and 25 years had gone by. And that's what I don't want for the next
Amen.
generation. And
Right?
so I'm much more intentional now about what I choose to spend my time on and what I say no to without guilt. And that was a huge finding in my interviews because a lot of women, they take on these things not because it's their passion, not because it's something they want to do, but it's this sense of responsibility or guilt or obligation to something or someone else. And sometimes those obligations are totally worth it and they're the right thing to do. I mean, raising children, you pour a ton of time and effort into that. But if you do your job well, you see the fruits of that later down the road, hopefully. But it's the other stuff. And it can be so many different things. It can be feeling like you've got to be at all the neighborhood functions because you just should, or that you've got to be the team mom. Or, for me, I was always busy and traveling all over the place, but I felt really guilty if I didn't volunteer with the kids' school. And I don't know why, but I would take on jobs that I could kind of do on my own time. I have another friend that's a CPA, and she laughed and said every single organization she's ever been in wanted her to be the treasurer because she was good with money.
Exactly.
So she would take it on, and then she would have the hardest time finding a replacement because nobody else wanted to do it. And it's just funny how we say yes to those things, just really not for the right reasons. And so we get so overwhelmed with those commitments that it leaves little time left for us to truly be fulfilled. And I think that we lose sight, or maybe we never even clearly define what's most important to us. And when you know that, when you can make your decisions based on your own priorities, your goals, your legacy that you're trying to create, it makes it so much easier to say no. Because when you can say no to something that's draining your energy, it gives you the power to say yes to the things that matter. And that's so important. And it's something that I did not do well. And I had several times where I had these wake up calls. I realized 10 or 15 years ago that if I would have died and somebody was giving my eulogy, I don't mean to be morbid, but if you think about what people are going to know you for and what they'll say about you at your funeral or something, they would have said, "Oh, she gets so much done.
Right?
She's a go-getter. If you want something done, ask Carol." But they probably would have said I didn't have a lot of fun, and I know they would have said I was stressed out. And I thought, this is not the model that I want to give to my children. This is not how I
No.
want to be
And you were
known.
working at an unsustainable pace.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
that people-pleasing behavior in your personal life, in my experience, crosses over into your professional life
Yes,
as
it
well.
does. Mhm.
And I am somebody that in corporate, when I spent a couple of decades there, I was successful because I was very good at what I did, not because I was good at managing all of the pressure and all of the politics
Yeah.
because I'm very direct and honest, and people most of the time don't appreciate that, and they're manipulative. But beyond that, I would pick up extra things to do
Yep.
that weren't part of my assignment. But now I'm done with my work and I need to have more. And then crossing it over into being self-employed. I mean, I worked
Mhm.
so hard, Carol, to get rid of people pleasing in my personal life where I'm often the host for holidays and I
Mhm.
would call multiple times, multiple people, coordinating to make sure every person could make it and rearranging as many things possible as I could. And it was exhausting. And it
Yeah.
wasn't as difficult when you had your kids at home, but now they're grown adults. They have significant others. There's 5 of them, and they have to accommodate other people.
Mhm.
So I had not my kids, but my sister, some of those extended people who, I mean, really were angry at me publicly and trying to shame me publicly because my kids don't live in the same town as me. And when they come in town and say, "Hey, can we have Thanksgiving at your house in the evening?" Yes. I
Yeah.
don't even have to think twice about it. But other people were really upset and mean. And it was at a point in my life where I had stopped people pleasing. So it was really easy for me to shut that down. But
Yeah.
literally, my sister was like, "You picked that time on purpose for when I was working and couldn't come." And I think the valuable lesson that she learned is that I don't have to rearrange the time of my event to keep someone away if I don't want them here. I simply don't
Yeah.
invite them. And it's as simple as that. But blending over into my professional life, I just thought it was all solved. But I'm sure I probably learned this from a guest on my own show talking about it. But I would find myself like a Friday I have maybe set aside for client work where I'm actually working on client business. I had somebody that called, "Can you meet on Friday?" And they're
Yeah.
a prospective client. And I would say, "Oh, yeah, I'm open on Friday." Well, you're not open on Friday. If
Right.
you're planning to work on these projects, you're not open on that day.
Mhm.
And rather than just ask the simple question, is it urgent? Do you have to meet on that day or can we meet next week? I wouldn't
Yeah.
even ask it. I would just sacrifice that Deborah time and that, well, I'll work on the weekend or I'll work that evening. And I
Mhm.
didn't even see that as people pleasing or frankly, commission breath, right?
Yeah.
Scarcity
Yeah.
mindset, fear of opportunity.
Yeah.
And that was for me how it was showing up over in my professional life. And it's hard to break that.
It
But
is.
just simply asking that one qualifying question. Now, if it's admin on Friday, well, I'm always pretty much game to schedule over
Me
admin.
too.
But
But
so do you see that crossover for professional life too? Like you can't really, people
Mhm.
say no, work and personal are different. But when it comes to how we are as individuals, it's really not that far apart, is it?
No, not at all. Matter of fact, my next book is going to be based on the rebalancing act, but applied to business. Because the same thing happens when companies try to do and have and be it all. And when you have people like us who want to be the go to people, get it done, ask Deborah, ask Carol, when you
Mm-hmm.
have people like that, it feels good to be the go-to person. It works well. You get recognized for it. At first, it's a great approach, but what happens over time is that it stops producing results and it starts to erode them because we burn out our best people. We ask the same people to do more because we know they can. And when things aren't going well in a company, the tendency is to start overcorrecting, add more initiatives, more hard work, more this, more that. And then we wonder why nothing gets better. And it truly is insanity. But it is so funny having worked with over 150 companies. One of the hardest questions for executives to answer is tell me very clearly in a couple sentences what your top 3 priorities are for the next 2 years, even
Oh,
for the
yeah.
next 6 months. They want to say 27. They don't want to break it down to just 3. It's like these can be large scale, big buckets of things that a lot of activities can fall into. That's okay. But you need to be able to say, these are the 3 things that matter most. And as employees, when we can line our goals up with those things, it keeps us from getting sidetracked by the other stuff. Same as it does in our personal lives when we take
Mm-hmm.
on things we shouldn't. And so for me, things like having a list of all my priorities, and then when my boss tries to, I don't want to say dump, but dump another
Dump.
priority.
Dump is the appropriate. I've dumped on people too. I mean, we all have had our
it
moments.
happens. And, I've managed people and had to do that. But it's always a better conversation when you have that list and you can say, okay, of these 10 things that are on my plate right now, what would you like me to take off the high priority list so that I can make room for this and do it well? Because a lot of times employees go to their bosses and say things like, I'm stressed out, I'm overwhelmed, I'm overworked. We use a lot of emotional or valuative judgments to describe how we're feeling about the work instead of just sticking to the facts of the work itself. So because interviewing people has given me so many stories and so many good themes and really confirmed a lot of the things I suspected in my first book, I think when I start getting people to tell the stories about what happens when companies try to do everything and the insanity that ensues, I think I'm going to have a lot of rich discussion there. And I think it's going to really be helpful to shine a light on the fact that you don't have it all by trying to do it all. And
It's
you
not
can't do
sustainable.
everything all at the same time. It's not sustainable. That is the most important word, because we can do anything for a while. We can burn the candle at both ends for a while, but that's not long-term sustainable success or fulfillment. And
No,
I've
it's
got
not.
the scars from it, and I don't want everybody else to have those scars.
I tell you, and as somebody who was like you in that position of, I can take more, when you stop, when you're taking it, it resets the set point of expectations.
Yes,
So
it does.
now when you say, no, I can't, now you're not being helpful because
Right.
you set that set point for yourself, and now you've reduced it. And so now you're performing less when you're really just back to where your norm is.
Yeah.
And that's a hard battle to fight when you've been doing that. And it's hard to maintain your value perspective,
Yeah.
I think, when you're doing it as well.
Well, it's funny you say value perspective, because as you were talking earlier, I was thinking of the phrase "know your worth," and it's so simple to say "know your worth," but truly, do we know our worth? When we're wanting to take every client meeting and be so accommodating, it is sometimes as if we don't think we'll get the job if we don't meet them right then, and if we say that we can't do exactly what they want exactly when they want it. But clients are people too, and they want you to be realistic. But we have to know our own worth, and we have to think really hard about what we're saying yes to, because everything we say yes to is taking away time from margin time that might enable us to do something that really matters better.
Yes.
And we don't often think about it that way. And we just think, oh, I can pull an all-nighter, I can work late, I can do this, I can do that. It's not a question of whether you can do it. And my mother used to always say to me, just because you can doesn't mean you should. But the same qualities that make us successful in our careers, we're smart and ambitious and dependable and all those things. Those are the same things that lead us to this exhaustion. And to some extent, I think it's a crisis of our own making, because
it
we give
is.
everything that attention instead of being discerning about what gets it.
I agree 100%. And once you've created those habits over decades, it feels weird when you start doing it. It feels like you're doing something wrong. It feels like I'm going to be in trouble. Something bad's going to happen because I didn't do it. And standing there and understanding this is what I want, feeling confidence in it is really hard to do. I want to put you on the spot to tell us about something from your own life, a decision that you were certain about intellectually when you made it, that it was the smart decision to make. You, like me, like I want to make a smart decision, but then you struggled with emotionally afterwards. There was emotional impact maybe that you hadn't
Oh my
thought of.
goodness. How many examples do you want? I mean, probably one of the largest ones was deciding to get divorced. I mean, if and that gets kind of in the personal space, I guess, but you know, I lived my life. It was like a series of checking boxes, all the ways my parents raised me to live. Get a good job, get married, have a house in the burbs, have the kids, bonus points if you're in the junior league or a sorority or whatever. I mean, I was doing all the things so that on paper and to the world, things would look just right. But I never stopped to think about whether those were the things that were right for me.
Did you feel fulfilled?
No. No. In fact, I was pretty miserable in my marriage, at least for years, but I wasn't going to get divorced. And the funny thing is, it's not about divorce. It's not about being against divorce. I have plenty of friends that were divorced, but nobody in my family had been divorced. And to me, I think I finally got to the core of it through a lot of therapy, but I don't like to quit and I do
Yes.
not like to fail. And I was raised where failure was not an option. And so I thought that life was just supposed to be that way. And I was just supposed to grin and bear it. And it wasn't until it was one of those last straw type incidents. And, our marriage was, like I said, not good, but we had kids together. We had been together a long time. And I think I was just too busy on the treadmill,
Mm.
running, just making sure I was getting everything done. And the thought of dealing with that seemed harder than just not dealing with it. And so it wasn't until he had an affair and I found out, it's quite a story and it's in my book, but I just said, I
Mm.
think you should leave. And up until that point in my life, I had worried so much about what everybody else thought of me. Even when I didn't have it all together, I still wanted people to think that I did, And
Yes.
all of a sudden, I was met with a situation where I couldn't care about what everybody else thought. I couldn't concern myself with the neighborhood gossip or what people might say about what was happening because I had two children who were in their teenage years who needed mom to be present and stable. At that point,
Yes.
their dad wasn't. And that's what my priority was. And that's when you have those moments where you say, this is what matters most to me. And this is what I'm going to focus on. And if people are going to gossip, if people are going to say things behind my back, they never were my friends anyway. And if they're my friends, they'll be there. And it was so funny because I was scared to tell my parents. And I guess in the back of my mind, I wondered if people would think I'm a big loser. And people were wonderful to me. They were so supportive and kind and gracious. And they were there for me. And it was so interesting because as I went through that, it helped me see that's what love looks like. Love shows up. Love is there when you need someone or something. And I'm not talking about romantic love in those situations, but just the love of people. And then it made me change my whole perspective on, why did I settle for something in this marriage that was so far from that? And now, thankfully I've seen that true love is possible and I approach it very differently now. But, sorry to get off on such a
Oh,
personal
no.
topic, but it was a real reckoning for me. And I do believe that moment when I decided to get divorced, that was the beginning of my rebalancing act. And it was the first time in my life that I did something for myself without regard to what everybody else would think. And that was huge for me. And I was in my 40s.
Well, I was in my 50s and I endured a lot of things in my marriage. And my ex was a gambler and a drinker, and he was drugging cannabis and other things. I begged him. I knew I wasn't in the right place. I could not make a choice to move forward, and he wouldn't talk to me to solve it. And I made the decision to stay in 2013. We had a blended family, and my boys, for example, were 2 when we got together. They're 4 months
Mm.
apart, mine and his. They don't
Wow.
remember not being brothers.
Yeah.
And my ex is the kind of person that when he's done, he's done. And I felt
Mm.
like they wouldn't ever see each other again, maybe. And I will tell you that he doesn't speak to me. So I'm not wrong in that assessment. But during that time where I decided to stay with everything unresolved, just powering through to make up for gambling losses, but I'd lost the human connection to him. Right?
Yeah.
I didn't feel connected because I wasn't, because he made vast decisions about our money and our future without me.
Yeah.
And that was a change from how things had been. And I begged him to please explain it to me. And he just refused. And now I know I was in fight or flight. I was in freeze. I could not make a decision, but I didn't know that then.
Yeah.
I just could see that I'm operating okay every other way. And so I must be choosing to stay. I must really love him and want to stay. And I subconsciously blew my marriage up and made very poor choices. And I had an affair. I flaunted it in front of him. Right? Because I couldn't make that choice for myself, and God will find a way to free you from it one way or another. And it did. And I'm certainly not proud of my actions. I wish I had the courage to make those decisions before it came to that, but I'm so grateful to be free. And that was the catalyst part of it. The other part, of course, was my mother's death. But those principles we bring over into real leadership in our businesses every day. I bring that strength.
Yeah.
I'm not carrying the weakness with me. I was running a business back then, but now I'm able to sit in a business that I love. Doesn't matter if I work 6 or 7 days a week because I love what I'm doing. I want to go finish it because I'm excited about it in a new way. And being able to be connected to somebody, and that human connection is so important. I'd lost it. You had lost it. And because of that, we both came together in the same place. And I find a lot of women do that as well. I want to ask, what do you think leaders misunderstand about the emotional responsibility that comes with leadership and decisions?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is a lot.
No, everything. They misunderstand
I think they misunderstand a lot. And I think that, let me just tell you right now that after teaching leadership for 25 years to other leaders and telling them what great leadership looks like, then I went back into corporate and I had to live what I had taught every day. And I got to see firsthand just how much harder it is to live by that day in and day out through the good and the bad than it is to talk about what good leadership looks like. And I do think a huge disconnect is related to the emotional side of things. And
that's what I was going to say.
Yeah. And so it's tough. And I think that we want to focus on that intellectual side of things where, okay, this decision makes sense. It's a smart thing to do. And then we want everyone to fall in line with that decision, but we need to recognize that people are emotional creatures and that we will not just fall in line because somebody tells us to, or because everybody says, oh, the company has to adapt or die, or, something like that. That doesn't appeal to people. People need to be able to see themselves and the integral part that they play in what the company's trying to do. And to do that, they need to understand a very clear strategy that they can articulate on an elevator to anybody who asks. You don't have to have a PhD in, statistics or something else to articulate the company's strategy. And they need to see themselves, and this is such an old example. It's been around for years, but I just love it. When JFK was setting out to put a man on the moon in the 60s, there's a story about him going to one of the space centers, and he saw they had a very late meeting, and there was somebody outside of one of the conference rooms sweeping the floor. And the president said, hello, I'm John F. Kennedy. He introduced himself and he said, tell me who you are and what you do here. And the guy gave his name and he said, and I'm helping put a man on the moon. For his job, he said, I'm helping put a man on the moon. He didn't say I'm sweeping the floors. I'm keeping the place clean. He said, I'm helping put a man on the moon. He was part of the mission. And it doesn't
Yes.
matter what your job is, you need to see that you're part of the mission. And to make that connection, that's very emotional. You've got to feel in your heart that what the company's doing matters and that you matter to their success. And I think that's probably if I had to boil down the biggest misconception, it would probably be that leaders they kind of undervalue the emotional side of things, and they over-index on the facts of the situation, thinking that alone will be enough to inspire people.
I completely agree with that. In fact, my audience knows because I've talked about this and I just did, in fact, the first episode of season 6. I think you're the second
Wow.
episode of season 6.
Yep.
And we talked about something that I have been working on, some of my own intellectual property, the enterprise growth cycle. Because the growth cycle isn't the sales cycle. It's not, I'm a sales expert, sales and marketing expert. So often you look right here in this little part, but demand building and trust is built throughout the organization, and the culture and team empowerment and customer experience is so important and intertwined with making people want what you have and make them trust enough to get it from you.
Yes.
That is built outside of the sales call. And one of the things that you said very, very well and gave a great example of, I've talked about in the past before too, when the receptionist, when the housekeeper, when the warehouse person or the fulfillment person understands the important part they play in getting customers, in growth, because that business exists for one reason, and that is to sell products and services, and how they are directly involved in people wanting it, because they have to want it for us to sell it. It is so empowering for them when they understand how important they are. And you demonstrated that so eloquently. Thank you so much for doing that. We are, at the end of the conversation. I think you and I are so well aligned. We could talk probably for hours.
I think so.
And I think the audience would probably love it too. But unfortunately, we have to come to an end. I want to say, I have one final question. For the leader carrying weight of difficult decisions right now, what would you want them to understand?
I think, and I've already said it today, but you don't have it all by doing it all. So as you're making a decision to think about what you want to do, also think about what you'll give up. Because curveballs happen, life happens. When we have no margin in our plans for the unexpected, we're setting ourselves up for disappointment. And so just recognize that doing more is not always the answer. And sometimes it's about doing less so that you can really move ahead on the other more things that you want to do in a meaningful way.
And I love that, the margin. It's like when you have an estimate, you put contingency in there for what if something else happens. I like that time contingency. I haven't thought of it in that way before, but when you have time contingency and now you've got room to give yourself grace, room not to pile on somebody else,
exactly,
room to think. We don't make enough time to think about something and allow our creativity to help us find the best way through it. We're so inundated with information. So stop ingesting, give yourself time to create as well.
Yes.
Well, I know that my audience is curious where they can get your book, The Balancing Act, and find out more about you. So tell us the best ways to do that.
Sure. Carol Enneking, my name, is my website. Hopefully they can see it in the show notes or on the screen.
They will be able to.
And you can buy my book anywhere you buy books. And, from Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all the major booksellers. It's available in a variety of formats. I also have some resources on my website to help people when they're struggling with priorities and figuring out what matters most. So they can find those there as well. And the book is called The Rebalancing Act: Wisdom from Working Women for Success That Matters.
Fantastic. What a great title. And I will tell you, we discussed before we started the show that she voiced her audiobook herself. So you have a
Yes, I
great
did.
voice, and I
Thank you.
love that when it's in your own voice. I think it just adds something extra. So I will indeed link to all of those things in the show notes.
Wonderful. Thank you.
If this conversation resonated with you, if it challenged how you think about leadership, responsibility, or the realities that come with growth, then my work lives beyond this podcast in your growth. Thank you. I help business owners and leadership teams identify what's actually creating friction in their growth, because the visible problem is often only the symptom. Whether it's leadership alignment, customer experience, sales pressure, culture strain, or organizational complexity, growth breaks in the connections between systems. And if you're wondering whether some of those early warning signs may already be showing up in your organization, I've created a free resource called 5 Signs Your Growth is Breaking. It will help you identify where friction may be developing before it becomes a larger challenge. You will find a link to that, my website, and other contact information in the show notes, and all of Carol's stuff too. So I know that you guys are going to be anxious to check out all of her stuff. Carol, thank you so much for coming on the show. You're such an amazing guest. I'm grateful.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
Until next time, everyone, stand strong in your power, especially when it gets uncomfortable. See you next week. Bye.